Late last year, the Washington Post received a tip. A young man, just out of college, had been promoted to a top job at the Drug Policy Office in the White House.
A new Washington Post investigation uncovered one inexperienced appointee who lied on his resume.
Only a year earlier, Taylor Wayneth was a volunteer on the Trump campaign. Now he was Deputy Chief of Staff at the Office of National Drug Control Policy. It was a remarkable rise. But Wayneth was fired in January after a series of stories published in the Washington Post raised questions about his qualifications. Months later, the Post asked him to tell his story.
I'm Taylor Wayneth. I'm 24 years old, and I was formerly the Deputy Chief of Staff and White House Liaison at the Office of National Drug Control Policy under President Trump. So I started at the Office of National Drug Control Policy in March of 2017. And at the time, the president was coming out with his opioids commission.
And that's what this commission, I hope, is going to be about.
That Governor Christie would be the chairman of it, and that the administration was able to put out a response to the opioid crisis that the country is facing. Before becoming the Deputy Chief of Staff, I had spoken to people in the office about my ambitions and what I wanted to do in the future, one of which being the Chief of Staff of the office. Now, when I was saying that, the goal was 10 years from now, trying to become the Chief of Staff of ONDCP. And then a couple of weeks later, I get tapped to be the Deputy Chief of Staff.
The organization behind Wayneth's appointment is the Presidential Personnel Office. It's tasked with selecting and vetting political appointees for the Trump administration.
This epidemic is a national health emergency.
This ambition took hold, but I had those moments where I was concerned about, have I reached too far? Is public opinion going to take over? Is this going to become an article? And it didn't for 9 months. And then caught wind that there were articles that were going to be coming out.
It wasn't just that Wayneth had been hired at a young age. There were questions about his qualifications and irregularities in the resumes he submitted to the government.
The article finally comes out on January 13th, a day I'll obviously never forget. And I read it and honestly thought, okay, it could be worse. So I immediately texted the then Deputy Director of Presidential Personnel. And we had this conversation going. And that's when he basically told me, listen, you're completely fine. It was a garbage article written by a garbage news organization. You're okay. No changes needed. And I asked, do I need to step down? Do I need to do anything else? And I was told no changes need to be made. Don't go be a martyr. And so I didn't. I moved on with my job, and I kept going for another couple of days until we caught wind again that another article was going to be coming out about a law firm that I previously worked at. These shoes kept dropping, and it got to the point where the people that were so supportive and so defensive of me, at least I had thought, were unable to continue their support and mentioned to me word for word that we have to stop the bleeding. And so the bleeding was, in order to stop that, was me resigning from my post. If I spoke out and spoke to the Post when the initial article was coming out, I was concerned that that would lead to me being terminated or having to resign. And so presidential personnel didn't want me answering questions. They didn't want for me to defend myself because they thought that the article was going to be nothing, and if I had stated anything, it might make the article worse. But I also think that there were concerns about being asked questions such as, did you actually want the job, or were you pushed into the job? I don't think that they wanted me to answer a question like that because it would show that they were the ones that were pushing me into it.
Wayneth believes the struggles at the Presidential Personnel Office have contributed to the administration's problems.
I think that the reason for these rapid rises and rapid falls in this administration is because of the fact that people are being obviously put into roles that maybe are not appropriate for them to be in, maybe too fast that they're being promoted into these roles. And the biggest issue is the fact that once they are put into these roles, it seems that the support for them when concerns about their background or history come up is fully put on them rather than the people that vetted them and put them into those positions in the first place. So everything that's happened, in no way does it alter my opinion of the president. I think actually that he's unaware of the things that have been going on. I don't know if he or even other senior members of the White House are aware of the fact that there is just this complete monopoly over the way that political appointees are handled by presidential personnel and others, and that the people that were loyal supporters and campaigners for the president when he was running are now being tossed aside. I was comfortable in the fact that I was doing well at the White House. I was doing well in the campaign. And to go from doing well, very well for a young person, to then no longer being employed, having to finally start paying off my student loan debt, figuring out what I'm going to do with the new lease that I just got here in DC. It's been difficult, but I also believe that it's a great place for redemption.